Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and things continue to spiral in my world. As you guys know, I make thousands of dollars a month on this podcast. No, I don't. I don't make anything. I am way in the hole on this. But that's not the point. I am running out of money. And my house keeps falling apart, and to repair a house costs all of the money, and so it's just life. It's that, and I'm not. You're just gonna listen to this for a second, and then we'll get into the stories. I'm not even mad or sad about the circumstances, because that's part of being a homeowner. Whatever. I get that. Like, stuff's going to happen. Stuff's going to break. I get that. But I had a particular standard of living, which feels very white privilege to say, but I had a particular standard of living in mind. And I didn't think it was outrageous. I wanted some money in a savings account for emergencies. And, like everyone says, oh, with money in my savings account for emergencies. But like what they're really saying is I just want money, because no one wants to have to use that money in emergencies. They just want to keep that money there. It's the security. People underestimate the power of security. And that entire concept has flipped my entire life around over the last couple of years. Because here's the thing. I had the security of knowing that my grandparents were alive and I could talk to them and I could go see them. And then they died. Selfish pricks, just up and died. Who does that other than like most people on this podcast whose stories I tell you? But like, they died. And so that security of knowing they were there and being able to celebrate milestones with and all that kind of stuff is gone. It's just gone. And then, the security of having money, just having it, gone, just because the house just decides that it sucks. And, it's just, and look, here's the thing. At least I don't live in Israel right now or Ukraine or some war-torn African country. I get that. But that's also it's also just a terrible argument to make, especially from someone who struggles to process things in a timely manner or in a helpful way. And so this is how I have to do it. You, with your proximity to whatever speaker system you are listening to this podcast is, you have to now listen to me complain about a life that on paper, not that bad, got a baby. Baby is healthy, at least as I record this. I don't know where he's going to be at in February. The house is still habitable. Is there a hole in the ceiling where there shouldn't be? Yeah, there is. But, it is what it is. I think here's the gripe I have. I would love to make renovations to this house that I want to make, not that the house decides to make for me. I like improving things. I don't like when improvements are forced upon me. Right. I need to make that decision, but, yeah, the more I talk, the more I realize I sound ridiculous. And, that I'll get over it. And, my hope is that, when this episode airs several weeks from now and I'm back listening to it, that I can look back and say, ha ha, what a dork you were worrying about all that stuff. Look at look where your life's at now. So much better. Or maybe it'll be worse. And I will feel bad about how much I took for granted right now. Who knows? It's just how life goes. And so, the key is, though, it's just like whatever you got going on, I'll make this about you for a second. Whatever you've got going on, it's okay to feel a certain type of way about it. You don't like your job? It's okay to not like your job. It's okay. Even if you're making $70,000 a year and you have enough to provide for your family, it's okay to hate it. It's okay to want something different for yourself. I think that we spend too much time comparing ourselves to others in either direction. I think a lot of times we get envious of people who are in better situations, but we also then beat ourselves up for feeling bad and then comparing ourselves to someone who objectively has it worse. And being like, well, at least I'm not them. So why do I? And then we make ourselves feel bad for feeling bad. And I don't think that's okay. I think we're all on our own path, and that, everyone else is on their own path. And we can't share their existence any different than anyone can share our own individual existence. And sometimes the game gets really hard to play. And sometimes there's a level, no matter how many times you try to beat it, you just can't. And you just keep trying and you keep trying. You use all your boosters and your power-ups and you still just can't get the break that you need from the Candy Crush level to send the right color candies to you to make it. And it's so frustrating. And you just want to quit and delete the app. That's not like a suicide thing. It's just, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. Anyway, this week, some lesser known war stories, specifically from World War II. So let's get into it. Finally 9 minutes into this episode. Jesus Christ. 5 stories here today, so it's going to be a big episode. Looking at the stories of Alistair Urquhart, Saburo Sakai, Calvin Graham, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and our first story here is of Franz Baron von Werra. What a name. Born on July 13th, 1914 in Luque, Switzerland. Although Baron was not part of his birth name, it was added to his name to signal distinction. In the weird way that like Europeans add titles to their names like Earl and Duke and all that kind of stuff. Baron was just a way to distinguish a certain family or nobility or whatever, which was weird though, because the von Werra family or von Werra family itself were actually really, really poor. However, Franz and his younger sister were ultimately given to the care of their cousin's wealthy friend, Louis Karl von Haber, who lived a relatively great life in Switzerland. Franz ended up joining the Luftwaffe in 1936 and then went on to serve in France at the start of World War II. Although he initially had some success as a fighter pilot, he actually destroyed at least 9 British planes while serving for the Germans. His Bf 109E4 plane was shot down in England on September 5th, 1940, where he died on impact. The end. On to the next story. So, no, I'm kidding. His plane did actually get shot down, but he survived the crash and was quickly captured by an unarmed cook from a nearby army unit. Now, not content with being a POW, Franz made his first escape attempt while doing manual labor. Only armed, though, with a pickaxe, he was easily captured after the soldier who was originally watching him overpowered him with a police baton. So like pickaxe versus a police baton, you should have the advantage with the pickaxe, but he didn't apparently. So who knows? After being interrogated for 18 days, Franz was transported to a POW camp in Lancashire. And then on October 7th, during a daytime walk, he tried to escape again by jumping over a stone wall into an open field. And he kind of gets away this time. 3 days later, 2 soldiers in Britain's home guard found him hiding under a small stone hut. But as the soldiers tried to take him away, he knocked over a lantern, which actually darkened, like extinguished all the light in the area and allowed him to once again get away into the darkness. 2 days later, though, he was finally captured after getting stuck in a muddy pit. He was then placed into solitary confinement for 21 days after being transferred to a different camp over in Derbyshire. Shortly after he arrived, Franz joined a group of prisoners in the process of digging an escape tunnel because, look, it's war. All the prisoners are trying to escape all the time. A month later, during camp choir practice, he and 4 others escaped. What is going on in these POW camps? Like, whose idea was it to have a prisoner choir? Was it like the POWs who are like, oh yes, to pass the time, we are going to form a choir. We are going to practice every day at 10 a.m. We are going to get together and sing the songs of our homeland. And here we go. Und feint, treint, wickets. Honse fas vadu vakazis Wiener Schnitzel, Wanze vodka, Wiener Schnitzels and the vodka. It's because they suck. They're soldiers. They can't sing. If you couldn't tell by the first opening of the show, I don't care about anything today. So you're just going to get whatever nonsense pours out of my brain. He quickly escaped from the escape tunnel. Everyone else he escaped with was quickly captured, but he was able to get away. And then, disguised as a Dutch Air Force pilot, Franz went over to a nearby train conductor and told him that he had just been shot down and needed to get to the nearest RAF base. Although a couple of people were suspicious because he really sounded more like a German guy than a Dutch guy, they transported him over to RAF Hucknall near Nottingham. He was even questioned by police about why he was there. Was he really Dutch? Whatever. But he was somehow able to convince him that he was definitely Dutch and totally not German or Swiss, I guess. While the squadron leader at the base went to verify Franz's claim, he quickly excused himself and then ran to the closest hangar where he told a mechanic that he had been cleared for a test flight. And then he just went all Grand Theft Auto on this. The mechanic, like, he didn't think that someone would lie to him about this. So he let Franz board a resting plane. He's in the cockpit. He's trying to figure out all the controls of the British plane, which are apparently different from the German planes. And at that point, while he's trying to figure out, the squadron leader comes and arrests him at gunpoint. Now, at this point, England is totally sick of Franz causing trouble, and they ship him off to Canada. On January 21st, 1941, Franz boarded a prison train out of Montreal to be taken to another camp in Ontario. And along the way, he jumped out of the train window near the town of Smiths Falls, where then he proceeded to walk 30 miles through the snow, crossing the frozen St. Lawrence River, and all the way to Ogdensburg, New York, where he immediately turned himself into police. Because, I don't know, after you walked through the snow for that long, you kind of come to realize, like, you should probably just give up. And that's what he did. American authorities quickly charged him with illegal immigration, but the German consulate paid the bail. But before Canada could extradite him back across the border, the Germans actually sent Franz down to Texas, where he could cross over into Mexico and then on down to Rio de Janeiro, then to Barcelona, and then back across to Barcelona and then to Rome before actually getting back to Germany and being hailed as a hero. Adolf Hitler actually awarded him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. And Franz then worked with the German military to improve their interrogation techniques, sharing with them what he had learned from the British and the Canadians along the way. Whereas the Germans had actually taken a pretty aggressive approach to their interrogations, Franz actually kind of convinced them that being nice and agreeable with prisoners might actually yield better results. as had been the case during his time with the British. Like, the British were super nice to him, and that, I guess they were probably a little bit more lax than they should have been, and that's what allowed him to escape. Franz's work actually resulted in improved treatment of Allied POWs in Germany. So, I mean, I'm sure some of you are thinking, like, why are you celebrating this Nazi feller? Well, he actually ended up helping the Allies out in a weird way. Franz then returned to combat in the Luftwaffe and went to the Russian front. He scored 13 more kills in aerial combat before going back to Germany to join a new squadron in the Netherlands. And then on October 25th, 1941, Franz's plane suffered an engine failure and crashed into the North Sea. Everyone just kind of assumed that he died in that crash, but his body has never actually been recovered. Our next story here is of Lyudmila Mikhailovna Belova. I gotta say it in the accent to get it right. She was born in Bielostrakva in what is now Ukraine on July 12th, 1916. Unlike most girls that she grew up with, she was more of a tomboy. She joined a shooting club where she became an amateur sharpshooter and actually earned an honorary badge and marksman certificate. At age 16, she married Alistair Pavlichenko and had a son, though the couple divorced soon after. In 1937, Lyudmila enrolled in Kiev University to study history in order to become a teacher. She also joined the school's track team as a sprinter and a pole vaulter. Additionally, she enrolled in the Red Army Sniper School because she still really enjoyed shooting things, even though it wasn't very ladylike. It wasn't very becoming of a lady. When the Nazis then invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, Lyudmila went to the recruiting office in Odessa and asked to join the infantry. But because she wasn't a man, the registrar recommended that she should just go be a nurse instead, which, like, this is what's wild. Like, being a nurse, from my experience, can be just as intense. I've never been a soldier in war, so maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like being a nurse is just as wild as being a soldier. So it's just weird that we like used to make these differences and categories like this. But Lyudmila refused to become a nurse. She wanted to be a soldier. And when the recruiter finally realized like how many training courses she had already taken in preparation for this day, she was actually admitted to the Red Army as a sniper and assigned to the 25th Rifle Division. Lyudmila was assigned a combat role, but was only given a single grenade thanks to a severe weapon shortage in Russia, and definitely not because she was a woman. On August 8th, I actually think that was probably the case. On August 8th, 1941, in the middle of a battle, a dying soldier handed her his bolt-action rifle, and almost immediately, Lyudmila turned around and killed 2 enemies and earned the trust of the rest of the soldiers in her unit. During the 2.5-month siege of Odessa, Lyudmila scored 187 kills and was promoted to senior sergeant. The next year, she married a fellow sniper, Alexei Kitsenko, who was then blown up by a mortar shell a few days later and died, which is so sad. Like, gets married in the middle of a war, so like you probably knew this was coming. And then he gets blown to bits a few days later. Following the loss at Odessa, Lyudmila then went to fight in the siege of Sevastopol, where she trained other snipers while simultaneously killing 257 Axis soldiers on her own. In June of 1942, Lyudmila was actually hit in the face with shrapnel from a mortar shell, and the Soviet High Command ordered her to be evacuated by submarine, which was actually a move only really reserved for important people, but at this point, like, she's killed over 400 people at this point. She's important. She's doing the Lord's work. And so they get her out of there. She actually makes a full recovery, but instead of going back into the war, the Russian government decided to make her a propaganda tool for the Red Army, going by Lady Death for totaling all of the kills that she had gotten during the war. Lyudmila was then sent to the United States on a publicity tour to encourage the Allies to then open a second front against Germany. Because at this point, they're just, the Americans are just fighting with the Japanese. The American media, however, did not take Lyudmila seriously because obviously women can't do anything, right? Women could just stay at home and faint and make babies. And that's it. Women can't do anything else. And so no one takes this girl seriously. Reporters asked really demeaning questions, like whether or not she wore makeup while on the front lines. They commented on her military uniform, saying it made her look fat. Like, they were absolute dicks to this woman. And she just, like, she kept going, and she just continued to be nice and, you know, did whatever was asked of her. And, you know, America, sometimes we suck. Following the war, Lyudmila worked as a research assistant at the Soviet Navy headquarters, but struggled with alcohol and depression because of her husband's death during the war. However, she eventually died from a stroke on October 10th, 1974 at age 58. Our next story here is of Saburo Sakai, who was born on August 25th, 1916 in Saga, Japan, to a family that came from a direct line of samurai warriors dating back to the Korean invasion of the 1590s. However, following the abolition of Japan's Han system in the 1870s, the Sakai family had been left to a life of farming rather than being super awesome ninja samurai warriors or whatever. Sakai enlisted in the Japanese Navy at age 16, where he received severe spankings every time he made a mistake because Japan, I guess. After graduating from basic training, he served on 2 different battleships before going to pilot training school in 1937 and graduating first in his class as a carrier pilot. However, he was quickly assigned to combat to participate in the Second Sino-Japanese War. When World War II began, which kind of melted, you know, which is what the Second Sino-Japanese War kind of morphed into over there, at least, Sakai was sent to combat in the Philippines, where he shot down or destroyed at least 4 different planes. The following year, in 1942, he was sent to Indonesia, where he shot down 13 more planes before he got sick and had to take some time off. After he recovered, though, he was then sent to Papua New Guinea, where he shot down even more American and Australian planes. And although he was under orders to shoot down every plane he saw, Sakai refused to shoot down a private passenger plane after he saw a white woman on board that reminded him of his childhood tutor, which is wild. That's also just wild to me that, like, again, and I've brought this point up before, I always had this image in my head that whenever a giant war was going on, I just thought that, like, that's the only thing that was going on. I just thought that everybody dropped everything and everybody was at war. But no, like, even World War II, when practically everyone is fighting in this war, there are still just regular commercial airplane flights taking place while enemies in jets are just flying around and, like, targeting and some shooting them down. That's wild. That's so wild. Like, just imagine America is going to war. Imagine that, like, Russia and Ukraine turns into, like, a giant European war. And, like, you're just an American tourist and you're trying to fly to the Maldives or something. And you kind of fly over Russia and Turkey, Ukraine, all them. And you just, like, you're just flying. All of a sudden you see this Russian fighter jet fly up beside you, like, inspecting the passengers, making sure that there's no enemies on there. It's just crazy to me. Maybe no one else thought of that. Anyway, after taunting Allied troops by flying loop-de-loops over Papua New Guinea just because he could, Sakai and his air group were then transferred to another base to defend against the American assault on Guadalcanal on August 7th. After downing 3 American planes, Sakai spotted 8 more aircraft flying at them. As he approached, he was shocked to find that these planes had rear-mounted guns, which they had clearly not covered in Japanese pilot school. However, he wasn't about to run away. He wasn't going to give up. He decided to engage them. He actually downed 2 of those 8 planes, but then his plane was shot by return fire that caused his cockpit to explode. Not just, like, part of the engine in the back or on the wings. His cockpit exploded. One of the bullets from the planes that he was fighting against went right into his skull, temporarily blinding him and paralyzing the left side of his body, which is not good. And then he's still stuck in this plane, which has exploded. His plane is falling 7,000 feet towards the ocean. Eventually the flames in the cockpit went out. And I guess by the air or whatever. I don't know how any of this works. But he's falling 7,000 feet. The flames in the cockpit finally subside. He gets enough of his own faculties about him to fly this plane all the way back to the nearest Japanese base, which was 5 hours away. He's got a bullet in his skull. He's paralyzed on the left side of his entire body. And so he has to fly this clearly damaged plane 5 hours to the nearest Japanese base. And he does it. Like, he almost crashed on the first landing attempt, but he finally landed and insisted on giving the mission report to his superior officer before he finally collapsed. He was evacuated to the Japanese mainland on August 12th, where he underwent a lengthy surgery without any anesthesia whatsoever. They removed the bullet from this dude's head without anesthesia. This dude's insane. The Japanese, all of them, were insane for a variety of reasons during World War II. This is crazy. Although the surgery repaired the hole in his head, he was left partially blinded in his right eye. After spending a year training new pilots, Sakai pleaded with his officers to let him rejoin combat because it was very obvious that Japan was losing the war. So in November 1943, Sakai was promoted to flying warrant officer and was sent to Iwo Jima, where he shot down several more American planes. When the war ended, Sakai then became a Buddhist acolyte and vowed to never kill anything ever again. He finished his war career with roughly 65 aerial victories. In 2000, Sakai was invited to a U.S. Navy formal dinner at an American air base in Japan, where he met some of the soldiers that he had fought in aerial battles with, including the pilot who had actually shot him in the head. I don't know how they knew that, but apparently they did. While at the dinner, Sakai reached across the table to shake hands with an American soldier, and at that moment, he suffered a heart attack and died. Just a wild story about this guy. Two more stories here. Next up is Calvin Graham, who was born on April 3rd, 1930 in Canton, Texas. Like most boys from Texas, Calvin enjoyed fighting and shooting things. When his father died shortly after the United States entered World War II, Graham enlisted in the Navy and was sent to boot camp in San Diego. There was only one tiny problem with that. Calvin was only 12 years old. He somehow made it all the way through basic training and was assigned to the USS South Dakota, where he participated in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, in which the Japanese gained a victory over the Allies. And he was later wounded during the Battle of Guadalcanal when he was hit by shrapnel while he was loading a 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. Although he was wounded, he helped pull other wounded soldiers who had been blasted off the ship back on board. He was awarded a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, and he was only 12 years old. I don't know if he faked, like if he got false documents. I don't know if maybe just the recruiters didn't care. It's just this 12. How do you not know? Like, he clearly had to look 12 years old. It's not like, I don't know, was he one of those like early puberty kids and he already looked like just a beefy older teenager, or did he look like a little 12-year-old kid? I don't know, but it's insane. This 12-year-old kid goes and fights in battleships, gets wounded. He's helping soldiers, and he gets a Purple Heart at 12 years old. God. Well, while the South Dakota was docked in New York City for repairs, Graham then returned to Texas for his grandmother's funeral without the Navy's permission. It was only then, I guess, that his mother finally let someone know that Graham was not old enough to actually be fighting in the war. The military, now maybe they have to finally recognize this. As punishment, he was sent to a military prison for 3 months and was only released when his sister threatened to tell newspapers that the military had imprisoned a child because he's still not old enough to be fighting in this war. Just absolutely nuts. Not only did the military let a 12-year-old go to war, they then threw this teenager. He's probably still like 13 or 14 at this point. They then throw a 13-year-old in prison for lying about his age. And they were totally going to just keep doing it. And his sister was like, yeah, we're going to tell everybody that you're imprisoning children because you screwed up and didn't follow through. And then they finally released him. Despite all of this, by the way, Graham actually tried to return to the South Dakota to continue serving, but the Navy politely declined and gave him his discharge on April 1st, 1943. They actually also revoked the Bronze Star and Purple Heart that he had earned. But rather than return to high school, like a normal kid, Graham got a job as a welder at a defense plant. When Graham turned 17, he properly enlisted with the Marine Corps and then served for 4 more years before he fell from a pier and broke his back. Because of his prior record with the Navy, Graham struggled to clear his record and actually receive his full benefits despite being classified as a veteran by the Marines. Thanks to President Jimmy Carter, Graham eventually received his honorable discharge in 1978 and had his medals, with the exception of the Purple Heart, reinstated. 10 years later, President Ronald Reagan awarded Graham his disability benefits and back pay totaling more than $22,000. However, because most of his doctors had died, all the invoices were lost, and Graham actually only ended up receiving about $6,000. To help recoup some additional money, Graham sold his story and had a made-for-TV movie filmed about his life. Although the movie raised $50,000, Graham only received about $15,000 thanks to agent and writer fees, and then he died from heart failure on November 6th, 1992. Our final story here is of Alistair Urquhart, who was a Scottish businessman who was conscripted into the British Army in 1939. He was immediately shipped off to Singapore, where he served with the Gordon Highlanders. During the Battle of Singapore in December 1941, Alistair was captured by the Japanese and sent to work with 50,000 other prisoners on the Burma Railway, also known as the Death Railway, because tens of thousands of POWs died during its construction. Despite being tortured, starved, and fighting off cholera and an ulcer that he treated with maggots, Alistair survived. He also spent a week in an oven after kicking a Japanese guard in the dick just because the opportunity presented itself. Like, the Japanese guard didn't even really do anything to him. Guard was just standing there, and Alistair just whammoed him, just punted that dude's nuts as hard as he could. And I get it. Like, you're in Burma or wherever. It's miserable there. It's hot. It's humid. There's mosquitoes everywhere. Probably other stuff. I get it. I would probably do the same thing. After over 2 years in captivity, Alistair was sent back to Singapore and loaded into the Kachidoki Maru, an American cargo ship that had been captured by the Japanese and converted into a hell ship, also known as a torture ship, because, of course, they would have those things. During the trip to Japan, Alistair and thousands of other prisoners were subjected to more torture and even cannibalism because Japan. What else did you expect? All right. Not a lot of really nice Japanese stories coming out during World War II. Like Saburo Sakai, probably as good as you're going to get. Everything else, just cannibalism and torture. Cannibalism and torture. And yeah. And it's crazy how they are now just like the sweetest people. Just Hello Kitty and Pokemon coming out of cannibalism and torture. I don't get it. But hey, whatever. It worked out. On September 12th, 1944, the Kachidoki Maru was torpedoed by the U.S. submarine USS Pompanito, kind of accidentally, because the commander on the submarine was unaware that thousands of POWs were on board that ship. Alistair was actually covered in oil from the blast and severely burned as the ship began to sink. Somehow, though, during all of this, he found a single-man raft and floated in the South China Sea for 5 days without food or water, aside from the oil he accidentally swallowed on the ship before it sank, which always a great source of nutrients, that ship oil. Alistair was eventually rescued by a Japanese whaling ship, which happily took him back to Japan for more torture. He was then sent to the coal mines before going to a labor camp in Nagasaki, which was promptly destroyed by the atomic bomb shortly after he arrived there. Despite all of this, dude survives. Like, I'm sure you were expecting, and then of course he died because it's the atomic bomb. Nah, dude still lived. He then published a book recounting his experiences and actually ended up living a relatively comfortable life, dying at age 97 on October 7th, 2016. All right, there you go. Some lesser known war stories from World War II Part 3. If you want to listen to Parts 1 and 2, you can revisit episodes 138 for Part 2 and then episode 38 for Part 1. You can also check out episode 86, which covers some additional World War II heroes. But let's recap today and see what we learned.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Saburo Sakai. Great Japanese pilot. As far as I know, didn't cannibalize people or do anything heinously awful. He just shot down a bunch of people. He's a really good pilot. Really wanted to keep fighting. And then died in the middle of meeting U.S. soldiers that he had fought with later on in his life. Number 2, Calvin Graham, 12 years old when he went off to fight in the war, and the U.S. military just kind of was like, yeah, cool, man, just do that. And then they kind of screwed him over, threw him in prison for lying about his age, revoked his medals. He never got his Purple Heart back. Not exactly the best ending to his story. And then number 3, Alistair Urquhart, crazy story. Survived years of Japanese torture, survived the atomic bomb, and lived a really long life afterwards to tell all about it. Next week on Our Weird World, I am going to give your airplane anxiety the kick in the pants that it needs with an assortment of airplane stories. 4 stories next week, looking at the tales of Albert Guay, Jack Gilbert Graham, The Miracle of the Andes, and British Airways Flight 5390. I don't think I'm going to be taking any flights anytime soon, so I can tell these stories. It's up to you whether or not you want to listen to them or not. So going to be a fun episode next week. Thank you for continuing to listen. Thanks for listening to me complain about my sad boy life earlier on. Tell all your friends though about the show. That would be helpful. Maybe I can get some sponsors or something and kind of make some money. That'd be cool. And keep it weird.